I think the challenges are threefold. First, the UK has made considerable progress in decarbonising its electricity system, and it will need to continue that and intensify it, and particularly make sure that, frankly, nearly all of Britain's electricity supply is decarbonised by 2040 or 2050 at the very latest. That will be a challenge, particularly to do so at a relatively low cost, and to take the public with us in that regard. I think the second challenge will be to further decarbonise the transport system, and particularly to ensure that electric vehicles become widespread in usage throughout the UK in a way that, again, doesn't lead to excessive cost. And the UK is going to find that, I think, a difficult challenge, but hopefully a doable one. And at the moment, we're seeing electric vehicles becoming more common and charging points springing up around the country in a way that I think is quite positive for the future. Our third challenge, and particularly so difficult for the UK, is the decarbonising our heating system, in particular the carbon emissions that come from buildings. Britain is about 85% of its heat comes from gas. Gas is lower carbon than oil, but still quite carbon intensive. And by 2050, we need to have totally changed that entire system and created a framework whereby the heat we produce via gas is produced by some low carbon situation. And that is not straightforward at all. We don't really know what technology will work, and in particular, we don't know the best way to actually persuade consumers and businesses to change their heating systems. So I think that is the biggest challenge. Taken together, those three challenges will be hugely difficult for the UK to deal with in the next 30 years. But nonetheless, I think and hope that we view it as a national imperative to do so. I think in some ways, the kind of changes we've seen, which are considerable in the energy sector, have not yet seen a matching change in regulation. In the sense, regulation was traditionally designed to be applied to large incumbent, often monopoly firms. In that it worked reasonably well, but it has been less responsive so far in working out how to deal with new entry, new business models, and it's very difficult to strike the balance between over-regulating, which you don't want to do, and indeed under-regulating at certain times where companies come in and produce bad outcomes for consumers. So I think regulation so far hasn't changed enough. Precisely how it will change is something we're thinking very hard about. And again, trying to balance innovation with protecting consumers. In particular, though, I think one of the challenges we have to deal with is regulation that was about monopolies can no longer be about monopolies. We have to find a way to encourage entry from beyond the traditional incumbents, and trying to actually unlock that particular issue has proven difficult so far and will, I think, be a further challenge in the future. I would say two issues particularly, or two sides of the same coin perhaps. One is to understand the differences, the variations that we have seen across the world. The UK has a particular situation, many other countries have similar situations, but also quite different ones. Perhaps different views on decarbonisation, perhaps different types of technology, start from a different starting place in many points, in many cases. What I'd like to see is to hear different countries' experiences, different jurisdictions' experiences of how they are dealing with energy transformation and what steps they are taking, if any, to help accelerate the transformation in a beneficial way. But while we want to see the different experiences of different countries, I'm also hoping that we'll be able to trace out common patterns, to trace out the idea that many of the problems we face are similar, and that hopefully if we learn from each other, we can adopt very relatively common approaches to facilitating transformation, which should A, help consumers throughout the world benefit, but B, also provide clarity to business and investors across the world that by and large, different countries and jurisdictions are talking to each other about energy, are making fairly sensible decisions, which will permit, I think, investment to take place at lower cost throughout the entire world, rather than being focused in different areas, which are asking different things from investors. So I hope we'll be able to look at both those goals and look at the transformation in the context of both our differences and how we can also learn from each other for the future.